welcome to another episode of Dress and Drinks. I'm Leon Wiebers. I am the host for this, and welcome to Costume Society of America's Conversations on Dress series, of which Dress and Drinks is part. I'm very excited today to have two guests joining us from the Uncovering Dressmakers Project. This is an initiative created by Sage Foley and Steph Haire to illuminate the lives and the labor of 19th century dressmakers. The project grew out of the challenges both faced while cataloging 19th century garments at Cosprop and the Victoria and Albert Museum, where they frequently uncovered makers' names, but with little documentation about the women behind them. Sage and Steph bring complementary training to this work, each holding a master's degree in dress and textile histories from the University of Glasgow. Sage has a background in costume for theatre and film and is assistant curator of the John Bright collection at Cosprop. Steph, whose interests center on 19th century textiles and female makers, is a cataloger at the V&A with foundational training in costume design. Together, they are developing an accessible database that will allow users to trace individual dressmakers, connect related objects across collections, and better understand the broader networks of the dressmaking trade. Today, we will discuss these surprising narratives garments can reveal, the tacit skills passed from one maker to another, and the possibilities of collaborative research to surface in hidden histories. Please welcome Steph and Sage to Dress and Drinks.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, how are you both?
Hi. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, welcome to Dress and Drinks. I'm really excited to have you on the program today and to talk about the project that you're both collaborating and developing. Before we dive in, is there anything else that you would like to say in way of introduction of yourselves or the project to our audience? And we have a great turnout today. It's awesome.
I mean, yeah, I think that about covers it. I'm Steph and this is Sage. We are partners in crime and we are very excited to be here presenting. So yeah, I think we can kick off.
All right, let's just jump right in then.
Awesome. Sage, you can share the slide.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you. So as Leon said, our presentation today is going to introduce our project, but we also really want it to be an opportunity to start a discussion with everyone on the call as potential collaborators and contributors. So we are in the very early stages of developing an accessible database. Users will be able to collate research into individual dressmakers, link related objects in collections, and chart the evolution of the fashion system. But what do we mean by dressmaker in this context? So before the advent of the celebrity fashion designers of the 20th century, whose names we all recognize, there were several different tiers of dressmaker who made women's clothing during the 19th century. From court dressmakers with teams of employees working from lavish, mirror-walled Mayfair establishments to the dressmaking departments of fashionable stores, the sweated labour workrooms of East London, and even individual women working from their homes, these makers are now often obscured from the narrative of the development of modern fashion. So dressmakers would usually begin their careers as apprentices to others, although some were self-taught. They were usually working to middle-class women and often single, although many were married. In her 1863 publication, The Employments of Women, a Cyclopedia of Women's Work, writer Virginia Penny explained that in dressmaking, a lady has only to establish a reputation as a successful fitter and fashionable trimmer, and she will be sure of a run of custom and handsome profits. Making it sound very easy. However, she does go on to say, girls usually spend from 6 months to a year learning the dressmaking business. Unless a girl has taste and talent, she is not likely to be benefited even by a year's apprenticeship, for it is rarely the case that they are instructed in any but the mechanical work. No pains are taken to instruct them in what is becoming or stylish, which shades are most harmonious, how to make a graceful bow and trim a well-trimmed end, which does imply that becoming a successful dressmaker required talent and skill, as well as a bit of entrepreneurial spirit.
I appreciate the talent and taste.
I know, right? So Unfortunately, biographical information, as well as the garments linked to these dressmakers, have not always survived due to a combination of reasons, including the gendered history of textile making, the historiography of museum collecting, and the fragility of the garments themselves, making their stories difficult to reconstruct. Gowns were also often remodeled or reused by the original wearers or their descendants, and of course, being made of fragile natural fibres, they're vulnerable to decay without proper museum conservation, and sometimes even then. What has survived are most often elite garments made by court dressmakers, thought to be important enough to be kept for posterity, or to have only been lightly worn by their wealthy owners who had a substantial wardrobe. In the absence of receipts or other documentary evidence, dressmakers can most often be identified through waist tape labels or stamps in the surviving garments. So these usually feature the maker's professional name, and you can see a little selection at the bottom of the screen. And they kind of functioned as an early form of designer label, and helpfully, most of them do have the maker's address on as well.
I have a question. This is really fascinating. So tell me a bit like how you, the two of you, in this, in your own individual research, where you're looking at these and were like, and decided to go down this path. Where was that? What was that like spark of, I can't find anything about Hall and Putwain or, or whomever were in the waist tapes or even maybe hand sewn labels in. Where was that moment?
So for me, in my role at the V&A, I was cataloguing our historic acquisitions, and I came across an image of a waist tape in one of our surviving garments that I didn't have access to the object right away, and the waist tape picture was very kind of blurry, and so I could see that there was the maker's information there, but it just wasn't legible. And I knew that Sage was currently going through similar gowns at her role at Cosprop, and so I sent her the picture and said, do you recognize this name? And she said, yeah, of course, that's Miss whoever. She was famous for getting into an altercation with one of her employees. We realized that I was doing this kind of research, and so was she, and there was nowhere for us to put it together, basically.
Oh, that's amazing. That's interesting. Because we see these, and when we're doing this sort of archival research, we'll see them, and it's always really fascinating to be like, oh, especially when you move, as you said, when you move beyond the famous ones that we all know.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many, as you'll see. And so to kind of illustrate this point, we actually have a little case study of a dressmaker who was present in both our collections. So this is Alice Mason, who was based in London, and whose business grew to become one of the most famous in the 19th century. But today there's relatively little known about her. I mean, I'd be surprised if people recognize the name. So we know that she was born Alice March in Hammersmith in 1823, and she got married to a Newcastle silk mercer, Henry Bailey Mason, in 1850, and they had 3 sons. So they're first recorded at 442 Strand in London in the 1851 census. They employed 11 young women as milliners, which at the time was a term kind of interchangeable with dressmaker. By 1861, they'd moved to 59 Pall Mall, and then finally by 1870 to the final address at 4 New Burlington Street in the heart of Mayfair, which actually would become the same address that the House of Worth moved into in 1902. So very prestigious.
Yeah, so can you contextualize either at that time or this time what these neighborhoods were like? Were they, as they were moving around, were they sort of moving up in the world, or were they moving in a different direction, or were these as they became more and more known?
So Alice Mason's dresses are all kind of around the same little pocket of Mayfair in London, which was really the most prestigious shopping district, and kind of still is, to be honest. That was the time when it was sort of up and coming for women's clothing, and yeah, it hasn't honestly changed that much. Most of the designers will have a store in Mayfair still, so they're in good company.
Fantastic.
So as a court dressmaker, Alice Mason dressed elite society women for royal presentations, and luckily for us, women's magazine The Queen actually published quite a lot of illustrations of her gowns being worn at various court events during the 1890s. She seems to be one of their favourite dressmakers. She had featured articles and several advertisements with them, so that's so useful for us. We also know that she made at least 18 costumes for the famous fancy dress ball at Devonshire House, held by
Wow.
in 1897 to celebrate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. For those who haven't heard of the ball, the 700 guests were asked to come dressed as a famous person from history. And famous couturiers like Worth and Poiret made gowns for this event, and so did Alice Mason. And luckily for us, the Queen ran a feature. So when we find photographs of the women featured in the Queen, we know that they're Alice Mason gowns. For example, the Duchess of Roxburgh in the middle of the screen dressed as Bess of Hardwick, and the Princess of Pless dressed as the Queen of Sheba.
Fantastic.
And it's amazing that these things survive and that we can see people wearing her gowns. It's very, very rare. So she made wedding dresses and trousseaux as well. The Queen ran a feature which is on the left hand of this slide, showing some of the gowns that she made for a socialite Inez Casbard Beausoleil on the event of her wedding. And she also made costumes for theatrical performances. And luckily enough, we have some photos of Mrs. Patrick Campbell wearing her gowns.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Such a great survival. So Alice Mason died in 1901, and her remaining stock was purchased and sold at a discount by the company Peter Robinson on Oxford Street. So kind of a sad end. And while there are no known images of Alice herself, some of her garments do survive in both of our collections, as I said. So this one here is a draped velvet bodice with black jet embroidered net, which is in the collection of the V&A. And we know that it's an Alice Mason bodice because of the presence of the waist tape, as I was saying, in the middle there. And she made quite a lot of these evening bodices, which were designed to be matched with different skirts. And you can see, again, an illustration from the Queen.
Do you have any sense of who may have worn this bodice?
Unfortunately, we don't. And I don't think, Sage, for your pieces by her, you do either.
No, I don't have any provenance for my dress either.
So this is one of the pieces that Cosprop, which is Sage's collection, have by Alice Mason. It's a warp printed floral silk gown. It's now sleeveless, but it did originally have sleeves, and it would have also had a trim, although that's now been removed. And again, we can see that it's got the waist tape, and so we know that it's an Alice Mason.
That's a lovely dress. Wow.
It's beautiful, isn't it? There's also a bodice of blue ribbed silk, which is on the next slide. It's trimmed with dark blue velvet and a little ruffle of cream floral lace. And again, we have the waist tape. So this is one of the most complete profiles that we have of a dressmaker. But for most of them, finding the information is a little bit more difficult. For Alice, we have photographs, we have advertisements in the Queen. But for a lot of dressmakers, one of the most common obstacles is that their professional names often changed over time. So many might work under a completely assumed name. Many might start with their maiden name, change to their married name. There's also examples of that being the other way around. They might also be referred to as Mrs. or Madame, depending on how fashionably French they wanted to seem at any one time. And some of them would also incorporate into businesses, which would then later change hands. And then these businesses would move premises. And so even though we do have this waist tape evidence, often the name or the address on one researcher's waist tape might be different to another, even though they're both from the same dressmaker.
I have a question. So from the governmental documents like censuses or other things, do you have a sense of how many women had businesses or shops as dressmakers in London in any given period?
much more than we have surviving attributed garments for. One of our sort of aims is to go through all the post office directories and try and make a profile on our database for every single dressmaker, even if we don't have any evidence currently from them. We're keen to kind of highlight where work needs to be done as much as where it has been. So yeah, we have a little mock-up of the database to show you in a second.
Oh, cool.
Talk a little bit more about that, but that leads me on nicely to my next point, which is that not all surviving garments are catalogued online. And anyone who is doing their own individual research doesn't have anywhere to deposit it, because often it's not quite long enough for a published article. And so unless, like Sage and I, you're very close, nerdy friends and sharing your research all the time, there's kind of all these different pockets of research that people have done, but nowhere to really bring it together. So I will hand you on to Sage now, who will take you through the little mock-up of what we've been working on.
Oh, fantastic.
Hello, everyone. So our aim is to have partner institutions contribute objects to a digital archive focused on the history of dressmaking. And I know that we've done a case study in the UK, but we are actually not going to be limiting our dressmakers to just London dressmakers or just English dressmakers. It's going to be dressmakers in Europe, North America, Australia, and I'll talk a bit more about the scope later. But I'm going to show you our mock-up. So this is our landing page. This is kind of what you would see when you first arrive. Pretty typical for any kind of museum database. And these are the different types of objects that we're hoping to have. So this is our browse page. And of course, obviously we'll have garments, which will be represented by objects, but we also want to have illustrations, advertisements, photographs and documents. And we also really love the idea of having places, so having a visual map of our dressmakers all over the world. And that will also be a really interesting way to show how different businesses kind of spatially connected with one another. In terms of the makers themselves, we will have that separated by individual and also by the business. And so I'll show you what that might look like in a bit. So this is an example of what it would look like if you were to select our garment browse page. And you can see we're going to have a lot of different filters. We would have it so you could filter by the institution that contributed it, the type of garment, so dress, bodice, whatever else we decide to add, date range, material, we can have a color filter, and then obviously also related entities, which would be the makers and companies.
I have lots of questions. I'll wait until you...
Yeah, no, it's fine. This is what an object record page would look like. It would look very much like you would see in any kind of normal online database. And probably the most, I guess, key part for most of the people on the call today is the rectangle on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, which is the information about the contributing institution. So it would link to their page on our site, which would allow you to see all of the objects contributed by that institution. And also, if they have it, a link to the object record on their public-facing database, or a place where you can contact one of their curators to get more information about the object that you're interested in. This is an example of a company detail page. It would include a business biography, as well as the dates that they occupied different addresses, which would be because something we've found in our research is that having an idea of when they were at certain addresses can really help you also narrow down the date of a garment. Other elements we would like to include on this page are connections to other companies as businesses change hands or merge, related ephemera and documents. For example, many well-known dressmakers can be found in court cases. One of those impactful examples being the death of Christina Wakely, which led to a huge amount of attention and reform in working conditions for seamstresses. We would also like to include a list of makers working at the business with their role titles. It was very common for a maker to start as an apprentice with a dressmaker and slowly learn the trade and then eventually open a store themselves. And so we really want to illuminate how the art and practice of dressmaking has been passed on from person to person. We also at the bottom have related garments, and we think that this also could be effectively represented through a timeline. So these are all dresses made by Madame Elise at different points in her career and held by different institutions. So it really shows the value of connecting these kind of disparate collections. This would be a more of an example of an individual page about the actual person that was behind the business. We have a more personal biography and perhaps information on their personal relationships. It was common for these dressmakers, particularly court dressmakers, to run in very influential circles. So they often have very rich and interesting personal lives as well as business lives. As we dig deeper, we also hope to uncover photographs of the makers that we research so that we can place that part of their identity alongside the garments that they created. But because of that, we also want to ensure that the elements on our page are visible, even if that information hasn't been uncovered yet. So this filler photo, which kind of looks like a social media profile picture, if you haven't added your own, is a good example of how we aim to show where contributions are still needed on the database.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the bottom of the page, you can see that there will be a link for the researcher or researchers who have contributed the bulk of information about each dressmaker. And that leads into another part of our database that we're really excited about, which is our researcher network. Any successful project will include or interact with the body of work that has already happened or is happening in that area. And researching dressmakers is obviously not new to the study of dress history, and it's becoming an increasing focus for institutions. However, oftentimes it's not enough information found on one dressmaker to be published in an article. So this research will just be left sitting on a computer, kind of inaccessible to the wider historical community. Our researcher network page will allow visitors to learn more about a researcher's body of work and hopefully also directly contact them. We first presented our project at a conference at the end of 2024, and a researcher that was in attendance saw this page with Madeline's information on it and reached out to her, and they're now actually co-authoring a paper about Madame Hayward together. So the project is already working to kind of build these networks. Of course, it's also very important to credit our contributing institutions. And so this is an example of kind of how you would be able to see all of our contributing institutions, hopefully all over the world, not just in London. My current count, Cosprop has about 250 objects that fit within our scope that have makers labels inside, most of them belonging to unique dressmakers, showing the impact that even one collection could have in kind of bringing forth these people's identities. And this can also act for a contributing institution as an additional form of community engagement and even marketing for the institution, especially if it's a small one that doesn't have their own public-facing database. This is a map of all of the dressmakers that we have been able to match to addresses in London, which is where we started the mapping, since that's where we're both based right now. And we've even visited physical addresses of some of our makers, which actually that is on the last, you'll see. But we took a few waist tapes that unfortunately were separated from their dresses, and we took them to the addresses that still exist, and we photographed those waist tapes with the. And now we are going to talk about a trip we took to the storehouse to see some of the objects in person.
Okay, before we go there, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So that is really amazing. And it really, when you first started that portion of this presentation, I began to think about how garments, travel around. And especially you're including such a wide span of countries, which is fantastic. People were ordering especially, from and shipping things or moving or getting married and moving to other countries. So it will be interesting to see it. I mean, you already illuminated how, some of these garments by the same maker are in different collections around either in the US or the UK. So that's really cool. How can institutions contribute their images? So how do you want them to send them to you? So that's my first question on this, because so many people have been talking about a database. How can we connect things? Is there a portal? So this begins in some ways a longer conversation around connecting collections as well. So how do you imagine people submitting to your database? And then actually one of the most pragmatic and difficult things around this is who's hosting your website? Because that is always the question.
Yeah, so to answer the first part of the question, we have created a template Excel sheet which an institution would enter their data into. We would then upload it, which is a really simple drag and drop process. And then the photos would also be ingested and connected to the data. So yeah, basically they would just send it to us. Well, really, they would reach out to us, say that they're interested. I would send them the template. They would put their information in, send me everything, and then we would upload it. So that's kind of the process we're looking at right now. It's still in the works. And we do have a host institution. I am not 100% sure if we're publicly announcing it yet. So I'm not sure, but we do have a host institution and we are very excited to be collaborating with them, and they are going to be the ones that will make sure that this information is open access, free for everybody to have access to. And yeah, they're a really great institution for dress history. So we're excited to be partnering.
Fantastic. I mean, because that actually provides, we could talk about this offline, but that actually provides some, once this gets going, some other opportunities, because as you've mentioned, there are any number of smaller institutions around the world in either the UK, the United States, Australia. That's part of the reason this program exists is, who don't have access to or the ability to put their work online, publicly accessible. So, and in some places in the world, it's more challenging than others to do that. So that is exciting news.
Yeah, and we also really want to make sure that we're representing all kinds of makers. Obviously in this talk, we've talked a bit more about these kind of high profile London makers, but we know that there were tons of women who were contracted workers out of their home. And we know that there were a lot of more rurally based dressmakers. And so we want to try and represent the kind of gambit, and we're open to exploring how we can do that. If it's not just through labels, maybe it's through other kind of forms of documentation.
Cool.
Yeah. And we're really keen to work with smaller institutions who will also tend to have records of more locally based dressmakers than we necessarily have at the bigger national institutions. Exactly like you said, provide them with a platform to show off their gorgeous objects.
Yes, and hopefully and that is fingers crossed, because I know the response is going to be to this. Hopefully, as the metadata has been generated or created on objects, institutions and collections, or the people doing so, have captured that information. And it said the label reads, or the waste tape is, whatever that is. So there may also be some homework for collections to do in order to, improve their metadata if need be, able to sort of also participate in this.
Exactly. Yeah, we're very excited because we've been helping our collections expand the metadata so that it's fit for this project. But we have our first external, and by external I just mean not Cosprop and not the P&A collection, that's auditing their dress collection so that they can contribute. So that's really exciting, and it's great to see it already kind of making an impact on deepening the information about these garments.
One last question before we move on, because we are in the age of AI. Have you found any way in which artificial intelligence has helped with any of this documentation or finding things? Because it can, and this is, I know, a very controversial question, because there are ethical things around AI usage, any number of challenges still out there, but it is so in the zeitgeist already.
I don't think that we have really explored AI in connection with this project, and we haven't really even talked about that or explored how that could happen. So not yet.
More to come, possibly. So, okay, I'll shut up so you can carry on, because, like, thank you for sharing the beautiful insights of the DNA East storehouse.
Well, as Sage alluded to, we are sort of beavering away still with our own research in the background, because this is very much a project that we do in our free time. And if you're into it, I have a couple more case studies of objects that we saw on a visit to the V&A. We made the most of the new order and object appointment scheme at our new storehouse facility. We had several gaps to fill in our research into some of the dressmakers from our collections. And so we hoped that going to visit the objects in person would help kind of solve some mysteries for us. And so one pair of dressmakers whose careers we've been researching are Mrs. Golding and Mrs. Humble. And so through mocking up the map feature on the database that Sage showed a few minutes ago, we realized that these two women had both worked from the same address, but just at different times.
Interesting.
Exactly. And so we were very keen to go and see the dresses that have been attributed to them and see what the kind of links might be. So if we can head to the next slide, thank you. Beginning with the dressmaker known as Mrs. Golding, who was born Mary Ann Brown in 1833 in Coddenham, which is in the depth of rural Suffolk, to Robert Brown, a blacksmith, and his wife, Sarah Peck. So Mary was one of several children. I think I lost count at about 9. The age of 18, she had left the family home to undertake an apprenticeship as dressmaker in London. So in the 1851 census, she's recorded as an apprentice to Mrs. Mary Smith, a dressmaker based at 19 St James's Street, Westminster, alongside 5 other apprentices, 1 assistant and 1 servant. 10 years later, by the time of the 1861 census, she's recorded as a dressmaker at 19 Conduit Street, in addition to 2 other dressmakers, 1 milliner and a general servant. William and Harriet Hearn are listed as heads of this household, but it's still unclear as to whether they were actually involved in any dressmaking business. So back to Mary, she married Thomas Edward Golding, a naval engineer, on the 1st of February 1868. And by October of the same year, she was advertising in London newspapers for an apprentice of her own, 19 Conduit Street, under the name of Mrs. Golding. So by 1871, she also appears to be employing her 15-year-old niece, Jemima Brown, as an assistant alongside 5 other women. So Mary and her husband remained at 19 Conduit Street as heads of the household until at least 1883, employing several other dressmakers at any one time. Thomas rose through the ranks of his own career and is listed as a naval architect surveyor in the 1881 census. The couple appear to have had no children, and by the 1891 census had retired even to 387 London Road in Croydon, where they lived under their own means, even employing a couple of servants. So they both remained there until their deaths, Thomas in 1905 and Mary in 1909. And at the time of her death, Mary Golding's effects were worth the equivalent of over 1.6 million US dollars in today's money.
Wow.
Right, which is not bad, I think, for a black.
She had some talent and taste, is what you're saying.
And I think she's a great example of someone who used that talent and taste to improve her lot in life.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So the V&A has one evening gown attributed to her, dated to 1879 and identified, of course, by the name and address on its waist tape. It's typical of the fashionable bustled silhouette of the late 1870s, and it's made from beige figured silk and trimmed with delicate lace and embroidery. We were very glad to see this one in person. As you can see from the image on the left, which is from the V&A website, it's very sort of covered by this evening coat that's underneath. So it was nice to really get a closer look at all of the details. Now, this gown is also the only surviving garment attributed to Mrs. Golding that we know of. And so given her decades-long career in the heart of London's fashion district, we are hoping that our project might bring to light more of her designs so that we can, get more of an idea of her sort of fashionable style signature. And although we weren't able to get a very good picture of the waist tape inside this gown, but we did have a look at it, and it does confirm the 19 Conduit Street address. So this address had passed into the ownership of the M.E. Humble court dressmaker and ladies tailoring business run by Mary Elizabeth Hall by the time of the 1891 census.
Oh.
So Mary Elizabeth Hall was born Mary Elizabeth Humble in 1860 to a farming family in the north of England as one of 8 children, in circumstances kind of eerily similar to Mary Ann Golding's early life. Mary Humble, however, married a manufacturing agent named William Watts Hall in 1888 in Northumberland and moved to London somewhere before the birth of their children, Edith in 1889 and Ernest in 1890. So Mary's dressmaking business was run from that same address, 19 Conduit Street, between approximately 1891 and 1905. It's not clear where and when she learnt her trade, but according to the 1891 census, 3 other dressmakers were already in her employment at the Conduit Street premises. So her business advertised in London newspapers variously as Emmy Humble, Mrs. Humble, and Madame Humble. She's usually described as a court dressmaker and high-class ladies' tailor with, quote, original and exclusive styles, which included dresses, mantles, coats. Later publications also include press opinions, sales, and seasonal fashion promotions for things like travel attire and fur. And so the V&A has 3 Emmy Humble dresses in its collection, which are just here. So the 2 on the right feature elaborate metal thread embroidery and lace, possibly inspired by similar dresses by the House of Worth. The other dress is a combination of warp printed silk and lace. And I think we can see she enjoyed experimenting with combining contrasting materials in her designs. The Queen magazine mentions her more than once as always being at the forefront of fashionable trends. And they seem to have had a really close relationship with her as an advertiser, with one journalist being granted an exclusive preview of her new styles in February 1894. And this is a quote, "under the strictest promise of secrecy." Although quite how secret this was, given that it was widely publicised in one of the most popular women's magazines of the time, is a little bit up for debate, if you ask me. But what is clear is that Mary clearly understood the benefits of having a good business relationship with the press. And so another relationship that I suspect she made the most of was with her husband. So his profession as a textile manufacturing agent was, of course, complementary to hers, and no doubt allowed her access to a huge variety of the fine fabrics that she used in her designs, which were really, really impactful to see, up close in person during our storehouse visit. And this is just my personal speculation, but given the sort of maximalist style of her surviving gowns, I think we can definitely see that she was someone with a lot of fabric options at her fingertips. Yeah, viewing these objects in person really allowed us to appreciate the quality of all the materials that she used, and also notice all of the little details. Like on the right here, you can see this metal button that's set with these sparkly little pastes. And Sage, if we can skip to the next slide, also the metal thread in particular, you can see on the skirt here, it's still in really nice kind of shiny condition. And I think, again, there was a period where her husband worked for a French embroidery manufacturer. Yeah. So from the waist tapes, we know that both of these gowns were made at the 19 Conduit Street address, which, like Sage says, helps us to date them, because between 1906 and 1910, the family moved to West Hampstead, and this address remained the last documented residence of Mary and William. After William's death in 1920, Mary seems to have remained there until at least 1925, but we haven't found any further records of her life yet. So seeing these objects in person at Storehouse allowed us to confirm and in some cases correct information that we had previously only been able to take from catalogue records and photographs. Several of the objects we examined, like this one here, had only been documented through black and white images, and in a few cases there weren't any photographs of the key internal features like waist tapes. And so what kind of became immediately apparent from the visit was how much of the data that is of real vital importance to fashion historians, such as construction details, labels, identifying marks, alterations, either don't sort of translate very well in photographs or are just absent from museum documentation. And so I will pass back over to Sage, who can sort of talk you through what this means for our project.
Yeah, and so we're about 15 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions as well, so to give some time for them. So I don't quite remember how many slides you have left, but I just wanted to give you a heads up.
No worries. I will just really quickly talk about kind of the different layers of potential engagement that, a collection could have, which is, maybe conducting an entirely new object level audit using our data framework, or re-examining objects that were cataloged decades ago under different descriptive priorities, relying on existing data, but perhaps revisiting photography of the objects, contribute selectively, focusing on only one portion of a collection, or just straight across mapping of existing data fields. And because of this, we wanted to just field a couple of quick questions to people who might have collections and might be interested. And you can just think about it, you can type it in the chat, or you could even email us. And these are the questions, I'll read them fast. If you'd be interested in participating in this project, are there any barriers that you would see in your participation? For example, is it a lack of funding or staffing? Would smaller, more focused contributions be more realistic than comprehensive audits? 2, what support structures such as guidelines, training, documentation would help most in navigating those barriers? 3, are there objects in your collection already attributed to dressmakers where they can be? And how have these attributions been made? Is it labels, receipts, letters, account books, photographs? How can we best represent home dressmakers in the project? And then what kind of attribution or credit would be considered acceptable for your institution? How would we handle image rights for your institution? How might contributing to the dressmakers database feed back into your own curatorial or cataloging work? And finally, what kinds of queries or visualizations would make the database genuinely useful to you? So if you could all just think about that if you have your own collection. And so these are just our next steps. And at the bottom of the page, you can see our email where you can get in contact with us. That's also our Instagram. And our website is uncoveringdressmakers.com. So you can actually register your interest in contributing to the project there. And on the right-hand side of the screen is a picture of one of our waist tapes with the building that they used to occupy. So that is the end of our talk today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Right on the money. Okay. Thank you so much. This is really interesting, and it has been in conversations for a long time. So I'm just going to start back with a few of the questions that have been posted in the chat. This is from Alyssa. What is the earliest named dressmaker that you have been able to identify this way?
So I'm not sure about waist tapes, but I think the earliest we have objects for are Regency dressmakers who are named on some fashion plates in the V&A collection. And we didn't go super into those, but if you're interested, Mrs. Bell and Mrs. Pierpoint are really, really interesting ones to look into.
Excellent, thank you. This is from PJF. What was the title of the publication by Victoria Penny that you mentioned at the very beginning?
Ooh, bear with me. Let me flick back through. It is the Employments of Women, a Cyclopedia of Women's Work. It was by Virginia Penny, and she wrote it in 1863.
Great, thank you. This is from Tina. Dressmaker versus milliner, you mentioned, was the same trade, i.e. dressmaker. In Montreal and Toronto, there were a number of milliners who made women's hats exclusively. So just as a statement to share that with. Another question from Alyssa. Will the database, you did answer this, will only be English European dressmakers, or will it extend to North American dressmakers or dresses made by these women that made their way to North America? And I believe you expanded upon that to include also Australia and other countries. What are some of these businesses under men's names? Were some of these businesses under men's names? This is by Candy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, Worth is a really great example of that, but also John Redfern, another example. They tend to be much better documented than the women's businesses, but we will definitely also be including them. But our personal research kind of skews more towards uncovering women's work.
Right. Thank you. This is from Louise. Where is the John Bright collection? I believe that's part of the cosplay. Is it housed within Cosprops? Cosprops?
Yes, yeah. So the John Bright collection is the collection of original museum garments that live inside of Cosprop, which is a film and theater costume hire house based in London.
Another question from Alyssa. Do you plan on applying for grants so researchers who aren't attached to an institution or are independent researchers could also be paid to work on this project with you?
So right now, I would say our grant applications are focused on the building of the database itself. And then after that, it's probably more likely going to be going towards like small museums, I would say, as opposed to independent researchers. But we have had a few conversations with a few different funding bodies that are willing to kind of work with people who are interested in working on the project. And so that's a little confusing, but basically we would write like a letter saying, oh, this collection wants to contribute or this person wants to contribute. And you would apply under one of their schemes potentially. So that's also in the works. But yeah, I mean, I think if people are really interested in the means, I'm sure we could help point them in the direction of potential funding bodies.
That, so more information to come, essentially, to check back on that. Two similar questions from Judy in RMJ. Do you plan to expand the database to include tailors and makers of menswear, or in addition to accessories such as shoes, hats, handbags, etc.?
We would love that. Right now, in terms of applying for funding and also keeping the work manageable for us, we have to narrow our scope to garments at the moment made for women. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential, and there are a lot of other researchers we know doing work into these various other avenues that hopefully we could potentially collaborate with further down the line.
Oh, cool. This is from HM. Do you need to be an institution to submit records to the database? I'm thinking of personal family collections, not just collector.
Yeah, no, we would love private collections.
Yeah, we would. We have some auction houses who are interested in contributing, and my collection is a private collection. So we're definitely open to anybody who wants to contribute.
So they should just reach out and engage that conversation with you via your email. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. This is from Joan. Remind us again, Sage, what is the organization that you are with?
I work for Cosprop, and the owner of Cosprop is called John Bright, and he started collecting original garments in the 60s. And so this is a portion of our business that's kind of turned into a private museum-like collection.
Excellent, thank you. This is from Jane. In Otago Museum in Dunedin, New Zealand, we have a collection of Paris and French made garments from the likes of Roof, Beale, Doucet, Pacan, and others not so well known. The designer label doesn't recognize the individual dressmakers. Would these fit into your database?
Yes.
100%. Yeah, where we can get names for them. I mean, even the dressmakers that I was talking about just now, in the records from the census from their businesses, you see the names of the other dressmakers who also work for them. And so, yeah, we would love to create profiles for everyone, because as we said, often they would start working for another dressmaker and then set up their own business. So it's all connected.
Great. Sage, did you have something you wanted to add to that, or?
Oh, no. Steph has absolutely nailed it. Yeah, we definitely, there's one person who this business is named for, but, scores of women who work for them over the years. And so we want to make sure that we're uncovering those primary people, but also, of course, all of the people that did all the beautiful work for them.
Yeah. This is from Kay. If dressmaker garments are part of an ensemble, will the accessories be itemized in the catalog as matching or coordinating with the primary garment? Specifically, headwear, millinery items, gloves, parasols, etc. So, if it's a whole look, are you wanting the records on all of those objects that may have been completely designed from head to toe?
Yeah, I would say if it's all kind of connected and all we know that it all came from the same place and it's a part of one outfit, then yeah, I'd say it probably would make sense to do the whole group together.
Great, thank you. So just as a reminder, and which I'm sure you're aware, Alyssa mentioned that building off of a past question about, in the US, a lot of historic dress and associated records for dressmakers in small local historical societies do not have any professional. The society itself, they may not have any professional staff to help with this. So hence about the question about grant and workers. So Tina asks, it would be interesting how many dressmakers worked out of their home or separate addresses. Speaks to the difficulty of a living wage as a dressmaker. Hope you're able to find garments from smaller businesses too.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that, especially in the 19th century, dressmaking gave women the opportunity to build their own careers, but also to still, be in their home, which was, of course, a big expectation for them at the time. And so I think that the home dressmakers are a really interesting side of this story. And yeah, we'll just have to explore more, I think, how we can look into them.
Yeah. This is a question from Kay. Can AI be used to bring back the original colors of the fabric, lace, and thread? The before and after photos of these beautifully worn creations would be very wonderful and interesting.
It's not something we've explored yet, but it's definitely something we could look into. I don't think either one of us is super well versed with AI, so we'd probably have to get a real pro to help us out.
Yeah, someone who understands how generative AI works.
Yeah.
This is from Candy. Since men had the finances, my question is, the business by name may be a man's, but it's often actually run by women. Is that yes?
I don't think we've found any instances where that happens, but we know that businesses under men's names employ women.
Yeah, and we do know that sometimes, the husband will be a business partner with the wife. So it maybe will be under the wife's name, but the husband will take a big role in the company. So that also potentially is maybe an aspect.
Yeah. And followed up by loans for businesses under men's names may give a skewed view of who's actually in charge.
We haven't really seen a lot of loan records. I mean, I haven't yet. I don't know, Steph, if you've seen a lot of loan records, but yeah, it'd be interesting if we were able to find more kind of financial documents, I guess.
This is from Lindsay. I used to work for a company called Fashion Constellate. I think they're a fashion conservatory now. They're a resale company, but they have a research side. Have you heard of them, and would you consider reaching out to them if they would collaborate with the pieces that they have in their collection?
That sounds great.
Great.
Maybe drop them an email with that information and share with them. Thank you. This is from Jane. Thank you. This is fantastic. Your database will be a wonderful addition to the scholarship on dressmakers worldwide. I'm sorry that I had to leave. Another question is, this is from Marion, and we'll wrap up here. Will this extend into the early 20th century?
Yes, our scope is with a hard stop at 1920 right now. So going right up to that point.
Great. This is from Susan. This was wonderful, and you're doing important work. Best of luck with it. And lastly, from Cindy, with regard to AI, look into the digital reconstruction field. Okay, so Thank you all. That is all of the questions. We had this was really, really fantastic. Sage and Steph, thank you for bringing this to us, and we're glad to help sort of promote this and share this out with our community here at Costume Society.